Hello, my name is Qasim Shamim, and I'm making this video for the vacancy of economics instructor that I applied for on UpWork. So before I begin the lecture, I'll want to briefly introduce myself about and talk a little bit about my professional background. So I started teaching high school economics back in 2014 when I graduated with a college degree in economics. I taught there for 3 years before I went for my master's to University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. While I was doing my master's, I taught as graduate student instructor to freshman students at UMich for the course of Principles of Microeconomics. I came back in 2018, and then again I started teaching at high school level. So the curriculum that we were following was of Cambridge International Examinations, which is usually followed in private schools in Pakistan. And so I taught there for a good 2 years before I transitioned to online teaching completely. I was working with edtech startups where I was teaching high school economics and business studies. So that was quite of an interesting experience, I would say. It was completely new, especially after COVID. There was a lot of transition, and a lot of students, in fact, all of these students had to adapt to this new online teaching. Um, to this online teaching thing, and it was exciting to teach online and everything. So now I'm equally good. In fact, I'll say I'm better at teaching online, and yeah, that helped me to understand how to develop a better connection virtually when you're not physically present with your students, and how you can keep your lectures interesting, which I think is the most important part. So I think that that's about me. So let's get started. And what we'll cover today is the topic of perfect competition. So it's an important topic in A levels economics, but I'll give you the background, assuming that you do not know anything about that, right? So let's get started here. I'll quickly share my screen and then we'll begin. Okay. Now, before we jump to the concept of perfect competition, right? So it's important that we understand what is this topic related to, right? So before we deep dive into what perfect competition is, something that you need to know is that what is market structure, right? So market structure is a concept in economics that talks about how economists classify markets in different categories. Why is that important? We'll come to it in a bit. But before we jump to that, let's recap what a market is. This is a very commonly used phrase and term in economics, and um, sometimes it can be confusing. So let's first understand what that is. So market is a physical or virtual space. Nowadays, it can also be virtual, where buyers and sellers meet or interact to make a transaction, right? Are we getting this? Market is a physical or virtual space. Buyers and sellers need to make transactions, right? Are we good on this? Okay. Now, who are the buyers and sellers? Obviously, those who are interested in buying or selling a certain product. So let's say we take the example of automotive industry. So automotive industry would mean all the people who are interested in buying a car and all the people or companies that produce and sell cars. So they constitute automotive industry. Similarly, if you think of any other product, let's say cell phone industry, so that will comprise of all the people who are interested in buying cell phones and all the companies that are producing and selling cell phones. They are part of cell phone industry and so on, right? Market or industry, right? Now, market structure, as I said, is classifying markets in different groups to better understand what are their characteristics and how competitive those markets are. To predict the behavior or the outcome of those markets is basically study of market structures, right? Okay, now one such type of market that we will talk about today is perfect competition. Now, what exactly is perfect competition? As the name suggests, it is the most ideal market or scenario that you can imagine. It's perfectly competitive. And what do we mean when we say perfectly competitive? So, to understand this, we will need to first of all understand what are the characteristics of perfect competition, right? Only then we'll be able to first distinguish a perfect competition market from other types of markets, and then we'll be better able to analyze and see. Okay, now a few characteristics that are important for perfect competition. The first one is there are many buyers and sellers in the market, right? So the first thing is that there are many buyers and sellers in the market, right? Uh, then the second one is there are no entry and exit barriers. Now, what are entry and exit barriers? Let's talk about that. Entry barrier is any constraint that makes it difficult for new firms to enter the market. There could be different types of entry barriers. For instance, if you think of automotive industry, now establishing a new business that manufactures cars is investment intensive business. Why? Because that will require a huge production plant, very expensive machinery, a lot of people, and things like that, right? Raw material will also be expensive and so on. So this is huge investment industry, and that's why not many players are there in that business. If you compare to this, if you um, think of a business like a restaurant, right? So restaurant doesn't require a lot of investment. You just need to rent out some premises, you need to make a well functional kitchen, you need to hire some people, cooking staff versus other customer care staff and things like that, and you are good to start. And that's why you'll see much more restaurants as compared to car manufacturing businesses, right? So that's one entry barrier, huge investment requirement. Another entry barrier could be legal constraints. When I say legal constraint, what I mean is copyrights and patents. What is copyright? Copyright is a, a, a legal statement or a legal uh, clause that says that this intellectual property or this idea or this concept belongs to a certain individual or an entity. Similarly, same goes for the patent. So if any pharmaceutical company, for instance, has patented um, their COVID vaccination, then that means that no other pharmaceutical company can copy that, because that would be theft of intellectual property. Are you getting me? So that's obviously another constraint that prevents new firms from entering the market, right? Then there could be some other types of entry barriers. We'll talk about those as we move forward in our syllabus. And what are exit barriers? Similarly, exit barrier is anything that makes it difficult for the firm to leave the market. Again, I'll not want to deep dive too much into this, because then we will divert away from our main topic. So we'll stick to it. But obviously, if you have any confusion, you need more explanation about that, I'll be happy to discuss. Okay, now that's the second characteristic of perfect competition. The third one is products are homogeneous, right? So products in perfect competition are homogeneous. Now, what that means? Homogeneous means identical. And if you think of products like agricultural goods, fruit items, and things like that, right? So those are exactly the same, no matter what part of the country you buy those from, what producer you buy it from a street vendor or from a departmental store, fruits and vegetables are exactly the same, right? So that's what it means when we say that products are homogeneous, right? Another characteristic of perfect competition is that there is high products have, let's put it like this, firms are price takers. Now, what do we mean by price takers? We'll see this in more detail when we come to the graph of perfect competition right after we discuss the characteristics. So firms are price taker. It simply means that firms have to sell the product at exactly the same price at which it is being sold by other companies, other producers, and so on, right? Now think about this. If you think of Apple and Samsung, those are very, there is a lot of rivalry between them when it comes to cell phones. But still, some versions of iPhones are expensive or might be cheaper than some brands of Samsung and so on. There are different characteristics and things like that, right? So Apple, being a separate brand, can afford to price its products differently compared to Samsung. Does it make sense? Similarly, if you think of laptops, MacBook is a different brand compared to Dell laptops or HP laptops or any other laptop, right? So therefore, these brands can charge different prices for their products, right? However, if the product is exactly the same as what your competitors are selling, then technically there is no logic as to why you will charge something higher. Let's take an example. So if you think of a departmental store that is selling bananas in your country, in any country, then those bananas are exactly the same what are being sold by the street vendor. So how can you charge a price higher than that, right? It doesn't make sense. People will not buy from your store if you're charging any higher, and so on, right? So price firms are price takers because products are homogeneous. That's the main reason why price firms are price takers, meaning they charge the price whatever is being charged by their competitors, right? To stay competitive. Okay. Another important characteristic is that consumers have complete information, right? Now you might be wondering about what, right? Right? So think about this. There is no information asymmetry. There is absolutely no misinformation or lack of information, and consumers are completely aware about the prices of the products, uh, what are all the companies that are selling that product, where can they find that product, and so on and so forth. So that means that there is absolutely no margin for producers to deceive or to cheat on the consumers. They have to be careful, right? So those are five most important characteristics of perfect competition. Now moving forward, let's move to the graph and see what the graph of perfect competition looks like, right? Now these characteristics are important. I want you to keep all these in mind, and we are about to look at a graph of perfect competition, right? So we'll also, as we'll make the graph, we'll also recap some important concepts of demand and supply and cost that we have previously discussed. But in case there is still anything that's confusing, you are more than welcome to ask me, right? Now, perfect competition. So the first thing that you need to make on the graph of perfect competition is the demand curve. Now think about this. Within perfect competition, obviously there will be multiple players. As we said, there are multiple firms. In any industry, there are obviously multiple firms, except for monopoly, because monopoly, by the very term, means single producer. But apart from that, all of the market structures that we'll talk about has multiple firms, multiple players, right? Now, the graph that we're about to make is just for one firm. Now, you have to be careful when you're making these graphs for market structures, that whether you're making it for the entire industry or whether you are making it for one firm. So if it's for one firm, it means one company. So let's say if I say that I'm making the graph for Samsung, then that means that it's only for the Samsung company, right? Not for all its cell phone industry. Because if I say it's for the entire cell phone industry, then that would mean Apple, Samsung, Huawei, I don't know what are other, including all the brands for all the cell phone producing brands, right? Okay, now what do we have on the y-axis? On the y-axis of this graph, we have the price, like the price of the product and the cost, right? So those two variables go on the y-axis, and on the x-axis of the graph, you have the quantity of the good, right? So you can write quantity of that product, quantity of X. Easy, we got on this. Let's keep moving forward. Okay, now the first thing that you need to draw, you need to draw the demand curve, right? So the demand curve, now this is where this gets interesting and confusing at the same time. So this is what the shape of a demand curve will be for one firm in perfect competition. So let me write down this as firm on top, because I don't want you to get confused as to whether this is for the entire industry or just for one firm, right? So this is for one firm, right? Now this is the demand curve. This is the shape of the demand curve for a firm in perfect competition. And you must be wondering, why is it a straight horizontal line? This kind of looks weird because you have studied in earlier topics of economics, you would have studied that demand curve is always downward sloping, right? Because price and demand has inverse relationship, which means more price, more expensive a product is, lower will be its demand, which is obviously intuitive to understand. But in this case, the price is staying constant. The price is staying constant, but the demand is changing, right? How is that possible? Now, let me tell you. Let's take a minute here and fully understand what a straight horizontal demand curve actually signifies. So that signifies that the demand for the product is perfectly elastic. Now, if you remember, perfectly elastic means that no matter what the change in what no matter what uh, there is absolutely no change in the price, right? Perfectly elastic, right? Because if the price changes anything, if the price changes even a little bit, if it increases either a little bit or if it decreases a little bit, the demand will fall to zero. Now, okay, you must be wondering, how is that even possible? Think about this. So that is exactly what I was saying. Let's say Walmart or any other brand departmental store is selling fruits, right? Let's say apples. Now, if I go and I see that the price of a kg or a dozen of apples is, let's say, $6, and I know for a fact that the shop in my neighborhood is selling it for $5. Now, think about this. Why would I pay an extra dollar on Walmart when I know that I can buy the same quality and the same quantity of apples from the local departmental store or the local shop for $5, right? So that's the reason that if the demand for a product is perfectly elastic, even if the price charged by any firm is slightly higher, the demand falls to zero. So the demand only exists at this price level. At this price level, the firm can sell, if let's say the Walmart decides to charge $5 per dozen of apples, then they can sell as much quantity as much they want to, but for sure they can't charge anything more because that's the price in the market, right? If you charge even a little bit higher, even if you're charging $5.5, the demand will fall to zero, right? That's why the demand curve of a firm in perfect competition is perfectly elastic. That's important to understand, right? Now, this is not only the price, this demand curve is not only showing you the price, this is also obviously the demand curve. So you can denote that with D. And then this is also your marginal revenue. Now, that's where you need to understand and not get confused as to what marginal revenue is. Marginal in economics means additional, right? And marginal revenue, mathematically speaking, is simply change in revenue due to change in output. So, how much will be increase in the company's revenue due to sale of one more unit of goods? So if the company sells one more unit of the good, how much will be the addition in revenue? That's what marginal revenue is, right? Is this good, right? So if I have to give you a quick example, let's say, uh, let's say, if the company sold, let's say, output and revenue, right? TR means total revenue, right? So if the company sold 100 units and after selling 100 units of goods, right, the total revenue, that could be anything, let's say, I don't know, cell phones, let's say. After selling, let's say, 100 cell phones, if the total revenue that the company earned was $10,000. Now, by selling one additional unit of the good, after selling 101 unit, right? After selling 101th unit, if the total revenue rises to $10,500, right? Now you can see that due to change of one unit in the output, the total revenue rose by $500. So how much will be your marginal revenue? Obviously, your marginal revenue will be $500. So that last unit that you sold was sold for $500. So that's your marginal revenue, right? Simple, easy. Okay. Now going back, this is your marginal revenue demand curve, and it also shows you the price, right? So let's stick to our example of dozen apples, right? So let's say a dozen apple costs you $5. Okay. Now the next thing that I'll draw on this graph is your marginal cost. Now, again, marginal cost. Now, what's marginal cost? Addition to cost. Due to production of one more unit of the good, how much will be the increase in your total cost? right? So by now you can perhaps guess the after looking at the um, formula for marginal revenue, you can fairly easily guess what how you would calculate marginal cost. So that is simply speaking change in change in uh, total cost. Sometimes while a writing tablet could be a mess, right? So change in total cost divided by change in total cost divided by change in output. Again, change in total cost divided by change in output. So this delta that I'm writing over here is basically that this signifies change in mathematical terms. It signifies change, right? So change in total cost divided by change in output is your marginal cost, right? So that's your marginal cost that I've drawn over there. Now you must be wondering why the shape of marginal cost is like that. If you don't know, I'll love to go in more detail after the lecture. But to quickly answer your question, marginal cost is upward sloping because as you start producing more units of the good, your um, marginal productivity of labor or marginal product of labor diminishes. So each additional unit of labor produces less, which means that for the same wage that you are paying to each of your employees, that additional worker that you hired produced less compared to the previous worker, and that's why each unit of the good costed you more, right? So we'll talk about this in more detail, but to simply sum it up for you, marginal cost is upward sloping, which means that as you produce, as you can see from the graph, as you start producing, so let's say previously you were producing at Q1 level of output, now you're producing at Q2 level of output, and let's say over here you'll be producing at Q3 level of output. So as you start producing more, as you move right on the x-axis, your additional cost rises. And why is that so? Because the marginal product of labor, let me write this term somewhere here. So the marginal MPL, we call that as MPL, marginal product of labor, is the additional units of output that each unit of labor contributes. So your marginal product of labor diminishes, which means each additional unit of labor is producing less, but you are still paying that additional worker the same wage as you were paying to your last employee, and therefore it costs you more to produce one additional unit of the good. Does it make sense? Okay. Now, this being said, the last thing that you need to draw on this graph is your marginal, marginal cost is already drawn. You have to draw your ATC. Now, what is ATC? ATC stands for average total cost. Average total cost is basically your total cost, how much it costs you, how much it how much it costs you to produce each unit of the good. How much it costs to produce you a typical unit of the good. And to calculate that, all you have to do is to just uh, all you have to do is to just divide the total cost of producing a certain thing by the total output that you by the total output that you produce, right? Total cost divided by total output is your marginal, is your average total cost, right? We got on this. Okay. Now, another thing that you need to be careful with is that average total cost, marginal cost will always pass from the lowest point of the average total cost. Why is that the case? I can explain you in more detail, but the simple reason that you need to understand that this is something that is mathematically true. And to just quickly tell you what I meant by that, listen to this statement again, that marginal cost will always pass from the lowest point of the ATC, right? So let's say if this is your U-shaped ATC, right? And again, there is a reason why the ATC is U-shaped. There's entire maths involved as to what determines the shape of this ATC to be U-shaped, right? But what I said here is that marginal cost will always pass from the lowest point of the ATC. So out of these three ATC, so marginal cost curves, right? The three orange marginal cost curves that I've drawn, one is incorrect because it's not passing from the lowest point of the ATC. Two is correct. It's passing from the lowest point of the ATC. And three is also not correct because it's not passing from the lowest point of the ATC, right? And again, there's maths involved, but we'll not deep dive into it at the moment. Okay, now comes in the main part. Now, after we have drawn all of these things, you need to know where the equilibrium will be, right? Now let me choose this black color. Okay. Now the equilibrium in perfect competition is, what is first thing that you need to know, what is profit maximizing point. So profit maximizing point for any private sector business, because we know um, private businesses are profit maximizing entities. So for any private sector business, the profit maximizing is where the MR of that company is equals to its MC, where the marginal cost of a company is equals to its marginal revenue, right? Now let's go back to our graph and let's see where that's the case. So this upward sloping is your marginal cost. This is your marginal revenue, right? So the pink line, which is marginal cost, and this purple line, which is marginal revenue, those are intersecting at this point. So you just put a dot over there, and then now you have to be careful over here. Then you bring a straight dotted line down. I mean, you can make a straight line, doesn't necessarily need to be dotted, but this is not part of the graph. This is something that we're doing for labeling and to understand what that shows, right? So you bring that dotted line down and you label it on the x-axis as QP. QP means the quantity, profit maximization quantity. Then if you see that this dotted line is intersecting with your ATC, this green curve at this point, and then you connect this point then you connect this point to, right? So you take it like this and you connect it to the y-axis to see how much is your ATC, right? Are you getting me? At this quantity, this profit maximization quantity, which could be, let's say, 500 dozens or 500 kgs or whatever, at this profit maximization quantity, let's say your average total cost, which I did tell you that it is the cost of producing a typical unit of the good is $4, right? Let's assume that's $4. Now, it means that if the company sells 500 units, it's selling each unit for $5. It's costing each unit $4 to produce. So it's $1 of a profit on each unit. So how much will be your profit? So the profit for that company would be simply the price minus ATC, or the cost, right? Times the quantity. Yes or no? Quantity, or the quantity sold, or the quantity, right? Sold in the market, right? So this is a simple formula that's used to calculate the profit. Yes or no? This is making sense, right? So 5 minus 4 is 1, and 1 times 500 is 500. So basically, the area of this rectangle between the price and the ATC till the profit maximization quantity is your total profit. And one last thing before we stop the class here, this is known as abnormal profit. Abnormal profit. So in economics, we say we even divide profit of a company in two categories. So either it will be normal profit, right? Or it will be abnormal profit. In this case, it's known as abnormal profit. Why so? I'll tell you why is that the case. And this is only short run equilibrium. This is short run equilibrium in perfect competition. The long run equilibrium is slightly different. We'll talk more about it in the next class. Okay. So I hope you like the video. If there is anything you want to know more about, I'll be happy to provide you that. Thank you.